Sony's latest PS Plus update is here and it is crazy. Is cloud gaming finally going the way of the dinosaur? And it's finally time for you PS4 owners to buy a PS5. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to PSReady. This is the midweek news update. We have a ton of great PlayStation news, a lot of stuff to look forward to, but before we jump into it, it would really help me out if you subscribe to the channel and set your notifications to all. If I've ever helped you get a good deal on an SSD, help me out by clicking that red button and the bell and setting them to all. I would really like to get to 200,000. Thank you. All right, so the first news story I want to talk about is a small update on Spider-Man 2. We talked about earlier in the week how the marketing for this game is really ramping up to a degree we haven't seen just yet. It all started with the comic book that's coming out on Free Comic Book Day, and then from there it looks like they're splitting off the remastered version of the original Spider-Man game, and now we're getting interviews with people like the narrative director. It's a small quote from John Paquette, but it's a good one. He basically said, "Boy, am I excited about Spider-Man 2. You know, there's obviously not much I can say, but boy, we are really working hard to try and make sure this is the best game we've ever made, and we can't wait to share it with you all." Now, all the headlines basically say they're working to make it the best game ever, but like every developer ever, I think, is working to make their game the best game ever, right? Still, it is really cool to hear the narrative director saying that he's really pushing and trying to make this the best game they've ever made, because the story in the original Spider-Man game is awesome. We've had so many movies and games and stories over the air from Spider-Man featuring Doc Ock, but the way that they made it work in the original Spider-Man game was just so cool and honestly felt pretty believable. Also, all the stuff they did with Aunt May, just the little changes, and finally the suit was just awesome. I honestly think Spider-Man's suit in the PS4 game might be in my top 5 Spider-Man suits ever. I was so stoked in Enter the Spider-Verse when they had it in the background, just because it's a really cool suit. So yeah, to know that they're trying to exceed the hype that story built up for Spider-Man as a character, that just gets me so dang excited. The one thing I am worried about is if this is going to be a co-op game, is how they're going to make the story as good, because I don't think you can really name a game ever where it was like built around co-op that had a better story than its single player predecessor. There's plenty of examples from games from the 360 and PS3 and then PS4 generation where they focused on co-op and then the story didn't turn out as good. And when you're including stuff like Venom, I really want the story to be as good as possible. But yeah, it's cool to hear them finally talking about Spider-Man 2. I think obviously Final Fantasy 16 is going to be big, but I don't think it's going to do the numbers of Spider-Man 2. And every time I read a story about the Spider-Man games, I'm like, dang, Xbox really passed up the chance to make their own exclusive Spider-Man game. Next up, there's a new game on the PS4 called Hogwarts Legacy. You might have heard of it. It came out earlier this year, I think in February, over on PS5, and Avalanche Software has been hard at work getting the game ported backwards to last-gen consoles. And, you know, they really did a commendable job here. It looks like the game runs at an acceptable frame rate. They did have to make some changes, though, to the overall world that people are noticing and are finally realizing why it might not actually be worth playing games on the PlayStation 4 that are cross-gen anymore, and I am so happy about it. The biggest difference people are noticing is that there's an uncovered bridge that allows you to kind of see the entire map on the PlayStation 5, but on the PS4, not only is it enclosed, but it's shorter. And people are realizing from this that there are a few other scenarios where they've had to kind of like bring down the scope of this game, which really sucks, because the whole point of Hogwarts Legacy is being able to explore the Hogwarts that you not only remember from the movies, but also the one that you kind of built out in your mind, because there are new places in the castle that were never explored in any of the movies, and now you're able to freely explore them. So having that compromise just so that they can backport this to PS4, people obviously aren't happy about it, and in my opinion at least, this could have been a great game to get people to upgrade to the PlayStation 5, and I honestly don't know why Sony didn't kind of force Warner Brothers not to put it on the PlayStation 4, because, you know, they had a state of play, they had a lot of marketing for the PlayStation 5 version, they also had a special DualSense that came out with it. They were really pushing the PlayStation 5 version of this game, so if they just paid a little bit more to maybe cover the sales that they would expect to see on the PlayStation 4, I think that would have been a net positive overall, because we're over 2 years into the life cycle of the PS5 and we're still seeing big games like God of War Ragnarok, like Horizon Forbidden West, and now like Hogwarts Legacy coming to this last gen console, and it's really going to come back and bite Sony, I think, when they release the PS5 Pro next year. I don't think this version of the game should have been made as well as it does run. I think they should have said, hey, Avalanche, Sony here, focus on the PlayStation 5 because we're really trying to push that console, because every big game that comes out on the PlayStation 4 really just conditions people to continue to expect that they're going to be able to play their PS4 and they're never going to upgrade to the PlayStation 5, which is ultimately bad for us because we want to see more native PlayStation 5 games. So yeah, kind of frustrating. It is cool that they got it running as well as it does, but you can see the concessions they have to make. And honestly, I don't think it's worth it. I think it's time to move on from the PS4. Next up, let's talk about the new PS Plus Extra update here, because it looks like Sony is kind of trying to combat the whole closing down of the PlayStation Plus collection with over 20 new games coming to the PS Plus Extra and Premium library. So if you subscribe to PS Plus Extra this month, you're getting Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, which is a PS5 game, and it's one of the better PS5 games. It's a great showcase also if you have a 120 hertz capable TV or monitor. Another next-gen launch title, Watch Dogs Legion, is coming to this service. I think this game is worth trying out. It's like an open world London, and you can go actually pick up John Wick and add him to your squad, and there's a level where you go through a nightclub and you can basically play through a John Wick fight scene, which is really cool. They added Humanity. I think this is a new game. I don't really know anything about it. It doesn't really interest me, but they also added Dishonored 2, which is one of my favorite games ever. It came out right when I moved to LA like 8 years ago, I want to say, but it still holds up. I play it about once every 2 years and I go, man, this was a great single player open world story driven game. I don't know why Arcane is moving on to stuff like Redfall, but here we are. You can play one of their best games on your PS5 for free if you have PS Plus Extra. Tomb Raider Definitive Edition, Rise of the Tomb Raider, and Shadow of the Tomb Raider also come to the service. One of my favorite games of all time, The Evil Within 2. If you just played Resident Evil 4 and you want a game that's just like it, but honestly advances the genre in a really cool way, and I don't know why Capcom doesn't look to this game when they're working on stuff like Resident Evil Village or Resident Evil 9, play The Evil Within 2. It even has a first-person mode you can switch to if you really like Resident Evil 7 and Village and how they play in first person. It's one of the scariest open-world horror games ever. I would skip Wolfenstein Youngblood. Thymesia is like a Bloodborne clone that people liked last year. Rain World is a side-scroller that I heard was pretty decent. I've never heard of Lake, but it seems cool. I like the title. That's on PS4 and PS5. Conan Exiles is an open-world survival game. Room Factory 5, never heard of that. Let me know what you think in the comments. Same thing for Story of Seasons, Friends of Mineral Town. And again, I've never heard of Soundfall, but it's one of these 20 games that are added to the list. And then over on PS Plus Premium, we finally got some more classic additions, and they're pretty good. You're getting Siphon Filter Logan Shadow, which is one of my favorite PSP games ever, and I cannot wait to play this on my PlayStation 5. Blade Dancer Lineage of Light, let me know about that one if you played it before. Pursuit Force was this awesome game where you play as a cop and you jump from car to car. I used to play the demo on the PSP at GameStop all the time, and when it went on sale for 20 bucks, I had my grandpa buy it for me for my birthday, and it was awesome. And then finally, we got Ghostbusters the video game remastered. I don't know why that one's only on PS Plus Premium, but this is the true Ghostbusters 3, and it makes a great companion piece to the movie Afterlife. So if you want to play a great Ghostbusters game or any of these games, you should definitely subscribe to PS Plus Extra. Definitely try out Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart and The Evil Within 2. Cannot recommend either of those games enough. So yeah, they closed down the PS Plus collection, which sucks. Hopefully you added all those games to your account, but they're kind of making up for it with one of the best months ever on PS Plus Extra. The thing that sucks is that they can remove these games whenever, whereas with the PS Plus collection, once you add those to your account, you can just play them as long as you're subscribed to PS Plus. But still, I would expect Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart to stay there for a while. Good on you, Sony. Next up, I want to talk about this article Jez Corden wrote up about Xbox maybe giving up on cloud gaming. And honestly, I could not be more excited about this. I don't think it's the future of gaming at all. I will always just prefer downloading a game at the very least to my console for reasons like input latency, resolution, frame rate, the fact that they can just take away any game that you stream even though you're paying for it, and that really sucks. Whereas at least with some digital games, you can keep them forever, and at the very least, you can just go buy the disc of the game and play the version on the disc, which is great. But yeah, this article basically says, according to Microsoft, Xbox cloud gaming on mobile devices has been unsuccessful. They say Fortnite has been available on Xbox cloud gaming for quite a while, and when it launched, it was among the first and only times Jez, the writer, has experienced queues to use Xbox cloud gaming, and that just ceased to be the case very soon after the game launched. I don't know anyone who's really going to be shocked by this news, because when you have stuff like the Steam Deck, now the ROG Ally, which I'll talk about in a second, and every other available option for streaming games, why would you ever spend hundreds of dollars on something like the G Cloud? And why would you really even bother playing games on your phone when you can just get any other device device that'll do it a whole lot better. I really hope Sony catches on to this. I mean, even with the Q-Lite, which I think is a dumb idea on their part, you're not even streaming games from the cloud, you're just remote playing them from your console, which is something you can already do. So for the like 10 or 15 people out there who really want the ability to play their PS5 games on a handheld over the internet, they're going to have that option there. And I'm assuming Sony's just going to mark that thing up like crazy so that everyone that is sold just makes them money in the bank. It's just absolutely nuts though that the whole reason Xbox's deal to buy Activision was blocked by the CMA because of their advances in cloud gaming, a service that they're even adamantly saying no one really wants to use. I'm sure they're really kicking themselves not only because it costs money to keep those servers going and they don't really see a lot of return on investment there, and it's not really a driving force behind people buying Game Pass, but also now they're not able to buy Activision because this thing that no one really even wants to use is blocking them in the biggest territory besides the United States. I'm really curious if this is just like what Sony does, where they go, oh man, we'll never be able to compete with Call of Duty if it's exclusive to Xbox, or if this is them actually being honest about cloud gaming, because whereas Sony, I think they'll be just fine without Call of Duty because of the quality of their games and all of the other deals they're making, like obviously making Final Fantasy 16 and 7 an exclusive on the console. Xbox, I think it just like doesn't really have any data to show as to why people would ever want to buy an Xbox for cloud gaming, right? Like at the very least, you could do the same thing with Steam, where you just download a game on Steam and stream it to your phone with Steam Link or your Steam Deck or any other device. But the difference is if Microsoft just gives up on Xbox, all of those digital games are gone forever. Whereas Valve has said so many times, if Steam goes away, they'll just unlock the DRM on all the games that you own and you'll own them forever, which I think is really cool. And the last thing I want to talk about today is that while Sony is adamant about making a remote play device with the Q-Link, Asus is over there basically making the better version of the Vita 2 that is the Steam Deck. So I love the Steam Deck. I have a channel called Deck Ready. I'm a Steam Deck fanboy. I probably won't be giving it up anytime soon for the ROG Ally, but I was able to try out the device over at Austin Evans' studio because he got it in early, and the first thing that came to mind when I was playing it is that this is the true Vita 2 experience. I downloaded Destiny 2 on there and I was able to play it at a mix of medium and high settings and lock it to a very solid 30 FPS at 1080p, and it was so awesome playing that game on a handheld for once because it's a Sony game, right? Like Sony owns Bungie now, which makes Destiny technically a first-party game for Sony, and you cannot play it on the Steam Deck, which blows because it's my most played game on Steam. I play it on my PS5 all the time as well, and I have over 1,000 hours in it. I also want to get my hands on one of these things to try out games that aren't really super playable on the Steam Deck despite being advertised as great experiences, like God of War, for example. I think it's fine, but you have to use FSR to actually be able to play it at 30 FPS, and even there, it drops down to 20 all the time, and it gets super ghosty and just doesn't look very good, in my opinion. I think that game would run super well on something like the ROG Ally, and then you have a game like Returnal, which technically runs on the Steam Deck, but just doesn't look that great and runs at around 20 FPS all the time. Horizon Zero Dawn is another example of a game that doesn't work as well on SteamOS as it does on Windows. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of Sony games that work really well on PC, but don't necessarily work the best on the Steam Deck. But because the ROG Ally A has a stronger chip and B runs Windows 11, I think all of those games would look and run better than they do on the Steam Deck, but also might look and run better than they do on the PlayStation 4, just because the chip in that thing is so dang powerful. And then of course, the biggest game of all that I would love to try on a handheld like that is The Last of Us Part 1. So if I was Sony, I would look at Microsoft, who is making a partnership with the ROG Ally, like they're going to have a representative there at the launch event that's happening today. I would have someone from Sony there as well, or I would partner up with Valve and say, look, we're going to give you the tools here to make PlayStation games look and run as well as they possibly can on something like the Steam Deck, because they really need to have some sort of handheld competition if Microsoft is going to go hard on actually partnering up with all of these Windows handheld devices. And if Microsoft starts working with companies like Aya or 1X Player and Sony is just left there not working with Valve, I think they're absolutely nuts and they should start doing that immediately. Because Valve has had partnerships with Sony in the past, like with Portal 2, where if you bought it on PS3, you also got a free copy on PC. There are plenty of examples like that, and I feel like it would just be a no-brainer for Sony to say, hey, we sent some developers over to the Callisto Protocol's team Striking Distance to help them get the DualSense working on the PS5 and also smooth out the game's performance. They should do the same thing and go over to Valve and say, look, here's a few developers that we've had working working on our PC ports, hopefully they can work with you to get these games looking and running better on SteamOS. The future is really uncertain here, especially with this news of cloud gaming not really working out for Microsoft, but playing Windows handhelds like the ROG Ally, I think the future of a Vita 2 is there and it's super bright, whether Sony's going to work on it or not.